Welcome back. One day before Michael Flynn is to be sentenced for lying to federal agents, two of the ex-National Security Advisor's former business associates have been indicted, charged with trying to influence American politicians. Both men are accused of illegally lobbying lawmakers to have a rival of the Turkish president expelled from the U.S. It is just the latest evidence of the broad reach of Mueller's inquiry. Prosecutors are requesting Flynn receive leniency at his sentencing tomorrow because of his cooperation with a number of investigations, including, we believe, this inquiry into Turkey and lobbying. And Rudy Giuliani used the case against Flynn as a reason the president won't sit down for an interview with Robert Mueller.
Does he want to interview the president?
Yeah, good luck. Good luck. After what they did to Flynn and the way they trapped him into perjury and no sentence for him, 14 days for Papadopoulos, I did better on traffic violations than they did with Papadopoulos.
So when you say good luck, you're saying no way, no interview.
They're a joke over my dead body, but, you know, I could be dead.
With me now is Daniel Goldman, a former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He's now an MSNBC legal analyst and fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice. We're going to get to Giuliani in a second. First, let's go to Flynn's associates. Explain exactly what they're being charged with, and what do you think this means for the Mueller investigation?
So they're being charged with the actual violation of failing to register as a foreign lobbyist, as well as a conspiracy to do so, and also one of them was charged with several counts of false statements. What's interesting about this is that Michael Flynn was not charged as for the substantive violation of failing to register as a lobbyist, but he clearly was right in the middle of this conspiracy. So when he gets sentenced tomorrow, he's going to be working down from what is a 0 to 6 month guideline range based on his cooperation. But he only got 0 to 6 months, Katie, because the Robert Mueller did not charge him with the full crimes that he could. I honestly don't really know. And I say that because that's not the custom in the Southern District of New York, where I worked for 10 years. And it's not, as I understand it, the custom and practice in many U.S. attorneys' offices, where you ordinarily would require a cooperating witness to plead guilty to what's called the top charge, the most serious conduct that they committed. It will become difficult now. This case was referred by Mueller to the Eastern District of New York, Virginia, we believe. And if Michael Flynn were ever to be a witness there, it would not be good for the prosecutors, because he didn't actually plead to everything that his co-conspirators are charged with.
And this is a conspiracy in order to get a Muslim cleric back to Turkey. Part of what they were doing.
Part of it, yeah.
But then the other part, Michael Flynn traveled with the president all during the 2016 campaign. People called him the Trump whisperer. He opened for him at events all the time. He was always there. He was one of the most staunch supporters of the president. It's almost as if he felt like what happened to him while he was in military service, he felt it was a conspiracy that kicked him out of military service or fired him from one of his top posts. Was the same thing as Democrats and the establishment and establishment Republicans going after Donald Trump. Like, they were in the trenches together. That's one thing. But the entire time he was acting in that way, he was essentially working for the Turkish government and not telling anyone about it.
It's really shocking. I mean, this was Donald Trump's primary foreign policy and national security advisor during the campaign, who at the same time is getting paid by the Turkish government to lobby American officials to reverse stated U.S. policy and adjudications with this cleric in refusing to extradite him without telling anyone. And not even without telling anyone, they created a bogus company in order to shield the payments. And then when they were caught, essentially, after the election, they made up a bunch of false statements. So it's quite egregious conduct by someone who's advising the president-to-be of the United States.
Two questions on Giuliani. What's going on? I mean, it seems like he's getting more belligerent by the day.
I think of only two things. Either he just simply does not know the law or the facts, which is possible, or he knows what's coming down the road. And that has actually been the case with Giuliani on several occasions over the course of this investigation. I think the president and his attorneys, because of his position, get sometimes forewarning about what's coming. And so, for example, you didn't play the clip, but he talked about Roger Stone yesterday, and he said even if Roger Stone advised the campaign when the WikiLeaks dump was happening, that's not a crime. That screams to me that he is trying to insulate the president from a forthcoming indictment against Roger Stone.
He's already invoking a PR strategy to make that not look like a big deal because potentially he has information from the special counsel on what they're already pursuing.
It's as I said, it's either that or he just because he's blatantly dead wrong on the law and frequently on the facts.
There's also this other thing. In talking about the Moscow project, his timeline differs from Cohen's timeline. Let's listen to this soundbite with George Stephanopoulos.
Did Donald Trump know that Michael Cohen was pursuing the Trump Tower in Moscow into the summer of 2016?
According to the answer that he gave, it would have covered all the way up to November of 2016. He said he had conversations with him about it. The president didn't hide this.
Earlier they had said those conversations stopped in January 2016.
The date, until you actually sit down and answer the questions and you go back and you look at the papers and you look at you're not going to know what happened. That's why lawyers, prepare for those answers.
Okay, then let me.
Did this lawyer prepare for this interview? Because Michael Cohen said that the meetings about Trump Tower Moscow ended in June 2016. Does Rudy Giuliani just not know the dates, can't remember them off the top of his head, or does he know the dates better than anyone else?
Michael Cohen certainly said it ended in June 2016. The open question is whether Donald Trump or his children or other people involved with the Trump organization continued up until November 2016.
So he might have just revealed something inadvertently, much in the same way he revealed the payments on Sean Hannity. All right, Daniel Goldman, thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time. Always a lot to talk about.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.